All right, so welcome back to our next session. I'd like to present Haley Precious. Haley comes to us from BC, having started skydiving in 2017. She's got just under 600 skydives, and her favorite discipline is free fly. Bienvenue à notre prochaine session. J'aimerais vous présenter Haley Precious. Haley nous vient de la Colombie-Britannique et a commencé le parachutisme en 2017. Elle a un peu moins de 600 sauts en parachute et sa discipline préférée est le free fly. This past winter, Haley joined the CSPA Women's Initiatives Committee, bringing forward her passion and knowledge in counseling and advocacy. She works for agencies that support women and children affected by domestic violence, intimate and partner violence, and sexual violence. She also runs support groups and therapy groups for people who have experienced trauma. L'hiver dernier, Haley s'est joint au comité des initiatives de femmes de l'ACPS, apportant sa passion et ses connaissances en matière de conseil et de défense des intérêts. Elle travaille pour des agences qui soutiennent les femmes et les enfants touchés par la violence domestique, la violence conjugale et la violence sexuelle. Elle dirige également les groupes de soutien et des groupes de thérapie pour les personnes qui ont vécu un traumatisme. Haley's presentation will be just a glimpse into how we as skydivers, coaches, instructors, and drop zone staff can create a safe and inclusive culture within the sport. We recognize that this subject can be difficult for some, and so we want to remind everyone that this is a safe, judgment-free platform. Our goal is to educate so that we can bring change, one step, one person at a time. La présentation de Haley ne serait qu'un aperçu de la façon dont tout, en tant que parachutistes, entraîneurs, instructeurs et personnel des centres de parachutisme pouvons créer une culture sûre et inclusive dans le sport. Nous reconnaissons que ce sujet peut être difficile pour certains d'entre nous. Nous voulons donc rappeler à tous qu'il s'agit d'une plateforme sûre et sans jugement. Notre objectif est d'équaider afin que nous puissions apporter des changements une étape, une personne à la fois. Thank you, Haley, and off you go.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you everyone for being here. I want to in particular thank both Michelle and Audrey for taking my presentation and putting all of the information into French as well as English. I don't speak French well enough to also present in French, so keep the Interprefy app handy if that applies to you. I also want to thank everyone for being here, whether you're from Canada or anywhere else, everyone who got up early on the West Coast to enjoy these awesome presentations. I want to start by acknowledging that I am speaking from the unceded and unsurrendered land of the Kakite First Nations, as well as the Coast Salish and Hakamelam speaking peoples. I'm so appreciative for the opportunity to be here today and amongst so many inspiring and accomplished athletes. And thank you for everything that you have brought forward so far. I'm going to be talking about skydiving culture and how we can create a safe and inclusive community. So first of all, why is this an important topic for us to be addressing in a skydiving conference? You know, it's not specifically training focused, it's not skill focused, but it is absolutely relevant to our experience in skydiving. So the purpose of the Women's Initiative Committee is to generate more female participation in skydiving through recruitment, training, and development, as well as addressing retention concerns. And this is where it became particularly relevant for me in the last couple of years, seeing people leave the sport, not necessarily because they lost interest in skydiving, but because they found it difficult, challenging, or just too uncomfortable to remain in the community. Skydiving is still a heavily male-dominated sport, and if we want to truly see our community grow and progress, then we need to address areas where we can better support women and gender diversity. And particularly when it comes to retention And we've talked a lot about development training, all of that. That's all particularly relevant. And some of the challenges have been addressed in our panels regarding gear fit for women being a little bit different, training for women being a little bit different. That's something I've also experienced and has been incredibly supportive and beneficial to have women address particular challenges that I've had training. Sometimes I was struggling with either my technique in my wingsuit or my technique with my canopy, and would get the advice from a lot of, stronger male athletes just telling me, okay, well, you just need to try harder, work harder, be stronger. Whereas when I would talk to female coaches, then I would get technique information that would help me actually address these things more appropriately for my size and strength. So our developmental needs are not always the same as for men. And when it comes to retention, people leave skydiving for all kinds of reasons. We've talked about the finances, we've talked about the lifestyle, and that's okay. It's not for everybody. But when people are looking at reasons for leaving other than a passion for the sport, then that is somewhere where we can address it and somewhere where we can create change. No one should be in a position where they're looking at leaving a sport that they love and are passionate for because they don't feel safe, they don't feel welcome, or they don't feel included as a result of their age, their gender expression, or sexual orientation. Those are areas that we can address and create change. So over the past 5 to 6 years, and this has been kind of in our general, outside of skydiving, our general awareness in the world at large, we've particularly seen change with the advent of the Me Too movement, and we've been able to open up the discussion surrounding sexism, sexual harassment, misogyny, how it impacts our daily lives, and also how it impacts sports in general. As we open up about this issue, more and more athletes are coming forward from all kinds of sports, not just skydiving, but we see this in gymnastics, we see this in hockey, and of course, our own sport. People are speaking out about maltreatment and what that looks like and how it's impacting our experience and our love of the sport. So this slide that you're looking at now is just some general information from a meta-analysis looking at maltreatment in sport. But before we go into the details on that, I want to just take a moment to address what is maltreatment in sport. The Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport defines maltreatment as any volitional act that results in harm or the potential for physical or psychological harm. So your screen shows these results, and we're just going to walk through them really quickly to get a sense of what's going on in sports in general before we launch into how this is impacting us specifically in skydiving. The most commonly reported form of maltreatment is psychological maltreatment, and that includes things like being shouted at, humiliated, put down, denigrated in any way, shape, or form. Other forms include physical harm, sexual harm, and neglect. Women report higher rates of all forms of maltreatment than men in sports in general. And our LGBTQS, our queer community, experience greater discrimination in sports. That is a demographic that's certainly underrepresented in skydiving, and we would love to see our community grow in that respect. 82%, so the vast majority of athletes and jumpers who identify as gay or bisexual experience homophobia in their sport. And transgender athletes are 3 times more likely to experience negative interactions when compared with cisgender athletes. So 36 versus 12%. And all of these numbers are higher than we would like them to be. So what can we do about it? Skydiving is not exempt from this reality. Conversations about maltreatment, harassment, and sexual assault have always been there. They've been conversations that have been had either, off to the sidelines or in private chats, private rooms. And now we have the opportunity to have these in a more open forum and create real change. So being able to bring this forward more openly, have it be an open dialogue, even though it's not an easy one to have, it's really the only way that we can create and hope for real change. So Sport Canada, when they look at maltreatment in sport, I just want to share a couple of quotes from these organizations. And it says that Sport Canada saying that organizations that provide opportunities for athletes to engage in sport and excel in sport have a responsibility to provide an environment that's free of harassment and discrimination and all other forms of maltreatment. And if left unchecked, maltreatment will continue to threaten the health and safety of our participants. And getting rid of it is not simply enough. We can't just have the absence of maltreatment. The CCES believes that we need to actually do more to prevent it happening, not just to respond to it. When the Me Too movement blew up on social media, people started sharing their stories. They started both in and outside of skydiving. This was happening on general social media platforms as well as skydiving platforms. And one of the things that struck me the most was just the fact that this was really, truly a shock to people that aren't affected by it. And to know that sexism, misogyny, sexual harassment really do go unseen by people who aren't affected by them. So this is not an easy conversation to have all the time. Melanie mentioned that misogyny is normalized in DZs, and I really appreciated that she acknowledged that. She touched on not knowing it was an issue because it was just part of skydiving and drop zone culture. And that is particularly relevant to what can we do to look at our own culture and create change. When people ask if it's difficult to be in a male-dominated sport and male-dominated environment as a woman in our sport, it's a good question, and it's one that is not always easy to answer. The truth is both yes and no. There are times where it's not an issue at all, and we love our community. We are proud of our skydiving community. We're proud of the camaraderie we have. We're proud of the bond that we share and the way that skydivers show up for one another. And then there's also some really big challenges. There's some harm that's being done that is sometimes addressed, sometimes accepted. And what can we do to really acknowledge that and be accountable for it? So I want to look at just some general examples of kind of some normalized drop zone behavior. You may have your own examples. You may have experienced this yourself or not, but these are just some real life examples for standard drop zone conversation and experiences. Before we touch on that, I want to share these quotes. So Drop Zone magazine brought forth an article in 2019 looking at complaints that were coming up from tandem passengers and how they were treated during their tandem experience. So there was a conversation that opened up around sexual innuendo, sexual conversation, sexualized comments made directly to tandem passengers, and just addressing that, okay, this was impacting both our reputation as a sport, reputation if the drop zone specifically to whom the complaints were made, and that, this is a problem in our industry and we need to do better in our treatment of women, whether it is our own fun jumpers or our passengers. So people in our community and people outside of our community. It's being recognized that, there's a trend here that we can do something about. And our own Women's Initiative Committee wrote an article on equity and equality in skydiving. And just looking at, okay, there are differences. There is a gender gap in our sport, whether that is equipment fit or skills training, really, like such as the examples I touched on of needing support specifically for women. And we can adapt support specifically to different demographics. It's not a one size fits all sport. Different things apply differently to different people. And I like that Kelsey touched on finding a coach that works with you, because that makes a big difference. I remember at one point I was struggling with some skills in the tunnel, and I had worked on this in my tunnel camp in Russia. I had worked on it in Seattle over and over and over again, and I just wasn't getting this one skill. And then went and did some coaching with a good friend of mine in Calgary, and he described the skill differently than any other coach had before. And it wasn't about me being a woman. It wasn't about me being smaller or weaker or anything. It was just simply, he gave me the concept in a different way that all of a sudden made me think of it differently and be able to do it. So finding people that you work well with is really important, and that support our different needs in the sport. So on to some examples of what some normalized misogyny and sexism looks like at a drop zone. That's just skydivers. It's something I've seen online a lot, and it really struck me as a way that we kind of dismiss and just normalize sexual harassment, sexual innuendo, and just a sexually charged atmosphere that exists at a lot of drop zones. Maybe not all. And if that's not your experience, great, then I'd love to hear from that as well. So I'm going to go through some examples of comments that are just general normal comments at a drop zone. First one, which one of you wants to get their ass eaten? An instructor says to a new jumper. Looks like you've been spending a lot of time on your knees. Senior jumper to new jumper. Packing is hard, says a new jumper. I've got something hard for you, says a senior jumper. I like watching you pack. It looks like you want to bleep your canopy. Pressuring new jumpers to flash the pilot for altitude. You know, this is a really normalized thing in our sport. It's looking at, okay, making our bodies and our nudity transactional for altitude, and can be really uncomfortable for some people. Pressuring new jumpers to either jump in their underwear or jump naked, being groped. A lot of this is dismissed, whether it's online or in person, as, well, that's just the skydiving community. Deal with it. Either join in or don't and leave. And that is the attitude in some places. So it makes it really hard to address or even exist in a non-objectified manner if you don't want to engage in this type of conversation, this type of dialogue, and not everybody does, and people should have the option not to. So I'd like to go now to our live polling. Michelle is going to launch some live polling for us and just get some feedback from you, our community, as to what you're experiencing in your skydiving life. Have you ever received any unwanted comments about your body or appearance? And you can respond. It's anonymous, so no one's going to see your responses as you take part in this poll. And this is just to give us a general idea of what people are feeling, what they are experiencing in their communities. So I'm going to take a moment and just give people time to answer this. Okay, thank you. So pretty evenly split, but with slightly more people experiencing unwanted comments. Second question, have you ever received any unwanted sexual comments? Pretty even numbers again, with slightly more people experiencing unwanted sexual comments. Thank you. Have you ever experienced any unwanted touch of any kind in skydiving or at a drop zone event? "29% yes and 71% no." I'm glad to hear that there's a lot of people that can say no to that answer. And for those of you that are saying yes, then know that you're not alone and there's support out there.
Sorry, the last question is not letting me launch.
Oh no.
So yeah, move forward. Sorry.
That's all right. Can we close the poll then? Perfect. Okay. So for those of you that have answered yes to these questions or know someone that has experienced, oh, it's working now. Okay. Question 4. Do you worry about the social or personal consequences of speaking out against unwanted comments or touch? So if you see any of this going on or have experienced any of it at your drop zone yourself or know someone that has, what are their concerns about addressing it? Are there concerns? Are there things that hold us back from addressing this? Pretty evenly split. That's actually more people saying, hey, no, I'm not worried about addressing it than I would have expected. And that's actually really good to hear. So I'm going to move on from this to, if this is occurring, if we are seeing harmful behavior happening at our drop zone or to our fellow skydivers, what can we do about it? What are our options? And now, there we go. What is in place for us to do? Our CSPA response to maltreatment in sport is our own policies and procedures around maltreatment and our codes of conduct. I want to touch just on our policies around harassment and abuse. You may or may not have looked at them or had to engage with them in your experience in the sport. So the CSPA does not and will not condone any harassment or abuse of any kind towards any person within the CSPA. In addition, unprofessional conduct of a harassing nature against or by officers will not be tolerated. We strive to adhere to the following principles in addressing all instances of harassment, sexual harassment, abuse of authority, or otherwise unwelcome behavior. The PIM5 covers our policies and procedures, and harassment and abuse are defined as persistent, embarrassing, derogatory, or insulting remarks or acts against a person's race, national or ethnic origin, religion, age, gender, mental or physical disability, or sexual orientation. And sexual harassment is specifically condemned. It may be defined as persistent or unwelcome remarks towards a person's body or appearance or attire or invitations or requests of a sexual nature, and or any unwelcome or inappropriate physical behavior. In addition, abuse of authority. This is really particularly relevant to anyone in a coaching or instructing role, or just in a overseeing or governing role of a drop zone or organization. Abuse of authority can be defined as either physical or non-physical, verbal or emotional abuse. Abuse of authority uses authority unreasonably to interfere with an employee or an employee's job, with a volunteer of the association, or a volunteer being humiliated, intimidation, threats, or coercion. It does not include normal managerial duties such as performance evaluations, discipline, and as long as these are not done in a discriminatory manner. And that's kind of the key, is normal scope does not extend to being able to discriminate, to being able to put down or degrade or humiliate people. Unwelcome behavior is any behavior that demeans or humiliates or embarrasses a person. Drop zone can be a rough environment, and we do see a lot of kind of harsh language, a lot of crass language. And so it's really looking at, okay, where is the line between what is joking around and what is harassment? What is what's acceptable and what's doing harm? If we're experiencing any of these harmful behaviors, what can we do about it? I recently took the C1 training, and just in my own role to be more involved and to be more of a mentor in the sport. And one of the questions that we looked at when it came to ethics was, okay, if you see something going on that's not okay, what would you do about it? Who would you talk to about it? And I think it was the entire class, or the vast majority of the class, said, hey, I would address it directly.
Haley, we've lost your microphone.
We may have lost Haley. We're going to try to get her momentarily back.
Hi.
There she is. Thanks, Haley.
Okay, when did I lose you guys?
About a minute ago.
A minute ago. Okay. Let's go back to sharing. Where was I when I lost you?
You can resume from there.
From here? Okay. Okay. So reporting options. If we don't have the option of talking directly to the people involved, we can address complaints to the CSPA directly, submitted in writing to CSPA head office, to the president or a director, or to the board of directors. And those complaints will be dealt with in accordance with the policies and procedures that we just went through. Another option is the Canadian Sport Helpline, with the phone number listed here, is in place to support and address Canadian athletes from any sport experiencing abuse and harassment or discrimination. Another option, if relevant and depending on the type of harm being done, is to report directly to the police, call 911 or your local non-emergency number. If none of those options feel accessible or safe, depending on the circumstances and who is making the report, another option that is a valuable option is third-party reporting, which can be done through a victim services agency or community agency in association with victim services. This option actually allows you to report anonymously harm being done. It's particularly used for sexual assault or violent assaults. So this is a beneficial option if you don't feel comfortable addressing it openly or want to keep your own privacy or anonymity. And your information will not be given even to the police. Your information is held by that third-party agency. The offender's information does go through the police and does go into the system. And you will be notified if charges are laid. Okay, so looking at that, also an important element I want to address is why sometimes we don't feel comfortable reporting, because there are barriers to reporting harm being done in any community. There's consequences, and it's not an easy process. Fear of social or emotional or physical repercussions. You know, what are people going to think? How are they going to react? Are people going to believe me? And if they do believe me, what if I say something, report someone, and nothing changes? Or what if, you know, the particular culture sees this as acceptable behavior or doesn't see it as a problem, and all of a sudden, by speaking out, I'm the one that has a problem. I'm labeled as the difficult one. I'm no longer welcome at the drop zone. I'm no longer welcome to jump with people that I want to jump with because I'm calling people out on their behavior. LGBTQ2S phobia and discrimination is another barrier to reporting. Maybe if I mention the harassment or the bullying or harm, whatever form it may take, it could get worse. I might be less safe. Online bullying is another barrier to reporting. If then, as a result of reporting, we receive, you know, hate online, threats online, harassment online, being made fun of online. There's instances of Facebook groups making fun of people reporting sexual harassment and sexual assault in our sport. And when you see hundreds of members saying, hey, you know, we're going to give you a hard time if you do this, it makes it really difficult to speak up. So what can we do to kind of support people in this process? And the number one is to listen and believe people in their experience. It might not be your experience, but it is true for them and it is what they're going through. One of the hardest things is just being alone and isolated and feeling like we don't have enough support in order to take action and look after ourselves. So be there for your friends and your Sky family and hear people, hear their experience, believe them, and listen to them. And that brings me to one of the really important pieces, which is, you know, we're all here because we love skydiving, because we love the experience of it. We have our own personal as well as our community reasons for being engaged in this sport. When we ask people what they love about skydiving, you usually hear things like, it's free, I feel free when I'm doing it, it's exciting, gives me confidence, it's the sense of adventure, my self-esteem increased when I started skydiving, I feel better about myself, I like to challenge myself. I like to relax. Personally, I have a very sometimes challenging job, a heavy emotionally draining job, sometimes working in mental health. And skydiving is where I go to relax. It's my own mental health support. So to live life to the fullest or to feel alive, these are all the reasons that we get up, we show up, and we challenge ourselves to improve, to progress, and to be better than we were the day before, the season before, the year before in our sport, because it makes us better people. It makes our lives better to be a part of it. So how, in addition, can we support minorities in the sport? Not just women are affected by bullying, harassment, etc. Men are as well. There's different barriers to men reporting, but equal barriers. It's really hard for men to talk out about bullying and sexual harassment. The stigma is, hey, just tough it out, be strong, deal with it. You know, if you report, you might look weak, might look soft. And then there's also minorities like our LGBTQ2S community. How can we be visibly and intentionally inclusive. One of the main ones is to establish an inclusive environment. And what does that look like? That can look like talking to your staff about the language that we use around gender norms, using gender inclusive language, respecting people's pronouns, respect everyone, bottom line. Act quickly and address issues if you see them happening. If you see any homophobic language being used, if you see discrimination, say something. Don't be afraid to say something about it, or talk to a trusted peer, a trusted coach, a trusted DCO, someone that you feel comfortable addressing these concerns with. Support and encourage access for all genders. So encourage women and gender diverse members to take on coaching, take on mentorship, include them in the community, be welcoming, and make that inclusion both visible and intentional. So the image I've got up here, I support positive space in sport, can be available as a sticker, as a sign. It can be visibly put up at drop zones and at spaces to just visibly show, hey, we are a safe space for everyone, regardless of gender or sexual orientation. And also to host LGBTQ2S focused events. That was a great suggestion that I got online when I asked for feedback. And I love that. You know, support Pride, celebrate Pride at your drop zone if that's something that you have the space and opportunity to do. Our community is the biggest advocate we have for change. We are so proud of our community as skydivers. We are proud of the way that we connect, support each other. We are very much a peer-focused sport, which isn't the case for all sports. We're a sport of adults. So accountability isn't just on governing bodies. It isn't just on owners and coaches and instructors. It's really on all of us to create the type of atmosphere and create the type of community that we want to see. We bring people together with our shared passion for skydiving. Some of the bonds that are formed are some of the strongest bonds in our lives. We coach each other, we support each other, we look to each other for safety and encouragement, celebration. We celebrate together and we grieve together. This is a dangerous sport. We lose people sometimes. And you know, we come together and show up for each other, whether it's over injury, recovery, loss. It creates an incredibly close-knit community. And, you know, this is just one more element where we have an opportunity to support each other in better ways, in more inclusive ways. So we can be a community that looks after one another, that comes together. We're also a global community, which is unique to skydiving. We're not just our own local drop zone. We can go anywhere in the world and skydive and connect with people and share our passion with people. And that's pretty special. So what can we do going forward? What are some practical steps that we can do to be more inclusive, to be more supportive? DCOs, instructors, coaches, and senior jumpers, they really guide our own little microcosms of our own DZs and our own little communities. They kind of set the standard of expectation for the behavior and the attitudes that we're going to see. So people in those roles definitely have a responsibility to lead the way for how we're going to treat the members of our community and what behavior we're going to tolerate, what we're not going to tolerate. Also establishing a DZ etiquette that's inclusive and supportive. So that's where we can look at, you know, having conversations with staff. How do you talk to tandems? Do you have a standard of care with tandems that includes professional language, that includes inclusive language? Follow our CSPA guidelines that we've outlined. Adhere to our codes of conduct for coaches and instructors. Be mindful of our own attitudes and beliefs. That's an important one. It's the personal accountability. We can't really change our own environment unless we look at our own behavior. And that's not always an easy thing to do. It can be really difficult to look at our own behavior and be accountable to where we may have done harm ourselves and where we can improve, where we can grow as individuals. Address sexism and inappropriate behavior and include everyone. Reach out to newcomers, be supportive of newcomers. That's something that our sport is definitely really special for, is everyone tends to share their passion for skydiving and for growth and development just automatically. I've received so much inclusion and coaching just from general members of the drop zone and just peer coaching, just because people are passionate about it. Offer, females focused training. I've been really lucky and privileged to engage in some female focused training, like the women's wingsuit camp that we did a couple of years ago, as well as a women's belly camp that we did a few years ago. So those are really incredible opportunities to connect, to bond, and to improve, and to gain specific coaching targeted towards our demographic. Be accountable as individuals and as a community. Like I said, we are a peer-focused community. We're an adult community. So it's really on all of us to create the kind of environment that we want and to support each other. And I just want to wrap up with this quote. If we measured success by the amount of safety people felt in our presence, what would our community look like if that was our attitude and our motto going forward? I think it could really improve a lot of the experiences that people have in skydiving, as well as just strengthen all of the bonds that are there and existing. I want to kind of reflect back to the things that I took away from Melanie's presentation. She mentioned mentorship, relationships, and healing, and that we can't be as impactful if pain is holding us down. So I think issues around sexism and gender and sexual harassment is kind of a pain that hasn't had the opportunity to be addressed openly in our sport. It's being addressed, it's there, it exists, it's a real thing. And if we can talk about it openly, then we can move forward and do some healing work on it as a community. Mentorship, relationships, and healing are kind of really key. And those are three things that she touched on. Mentorship, we are very much a mentor-led sport. And one of my mentors is the reason that I became more passionate about moving forward in these areas. Unknowingly, she touched on my inspiration for joining WIC and for doing this work and this presentation. It wasn't even related to skydiving. We were just all together one day and going towards an event and talking about work and challenges that come around harassment or maltreatment or gender at work. And she said, when you see harm being done, if you're the one that sees it, you have a responsibility to do something about it. And that stuck with me and it motivated me. So I really want to thank all of you for being here today. If this is new information to you, thank you for listening, being open and taking it in. And if this is not something that you have experienced or have dealt with in your skydiving career, in your personal life, or in your drop zone life, then just know that you are not alone and we are hoping to create real change going forward. So thank you. If there are any questions, we can move on to questions.
Hey, Haley, thank you guys so very much. We actually are out of a allotted time, which is okay, because Haley, that was very powerful and a message that needed to be heard and continues to need to be heard. I am just going to right now post in the chat that if there's any questions that you want to ask or any more information that you require, if you guys would like to send it directly to me. Again, I'm Allison Cooney. I am the chair of the Women's Initiative Committee for CSPA. And then we can, or I can look at those questions specifically, work with Haley, of course, work with Michelle as the executive director of CSPA and get more information on that. I know someone has already asked me if we could get a copy of the presentation. So yeah, so Haley, thank you very much. I'm just going to encourage everyone to take an opportunity. There is a QR code on your screen right now, and I will be posting the link. This is our survey regarding Haley's presentation, and we are scheduled to go back on at 12:15 Pacific time with Project 19. So we'll let everyone take a 9-minute-ish break, and we'll see you guys back here at 12:15. Again, thank you so much, Haley.